She came home early. That was the only mistake she made. The lights were low, the music was soft, and standing in her kitchen, wrapped in her husband's robe like she owned every inch of that house, was a woman Amara had seen at every dinner party, every charity gala, every quiet moment she had foolishly believed belonged only to them. Damian didn't flinch. That was the part that broke something inside her. Not the betrayal itself, but the way he stood there. Calm, unsurprised, as if he had already rehearsed this moment and decided he could survive it. He was wrong. If this story already has you feeling something, drop the name of your city in the comments right now. Hit that like button and stay until the very end. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Let's begin. The charity event had ended 40 minutes early because the keynote speaker collapsed from exhaustion on stage. Amara remembered thinking it was almost poetic. A man who spent his whole life performing strength finally running out of it in front of an audience. She had gathered her clutch, said her goodbyes to the foundation board, and stepped into the car without once suspecting that her own life was about to do the same thing. The drive back to their Westchester estate took 22 minutes. She counted them later, lying in a strange bed in a cheap apartment, trying to understand how a person's entire world could be dismantled in less time than it takes to watch the evening news. The house was lit from the inside the way it only ever was when Damian entertained. A warm gold glow spilling through the tall windows. The kind of light that used to make Amara feel safe, like a signal that the man she loved was home and the walls around her life were still standing. She didn't feel that tonight. She noticed that and filed it away somewhere quiet inside herself, the way a woman who has survived difficult things learns to notice what her body knows before her mind catches up. She let herself in through the side entrance. Her heels were already in her hand. She heard the laughter before she saw anything. It was low, intimate, the kind of laughter that doesn't happen between colleagues or friends. The kind that happens between people who have stopped performing for each other and started being honest in all the wrong ways. Amara's steps slowed without her deciding to slow them. Her hand found the wall. Not for balance. She was not the kind of woman who needed to hold a wall. More like she was steadying the wall itself, the way a person grips something solid when the ground beneath them starts to shift. She came around the corner into the main corridor and stopped. Damian was standing near the bar cart in the sitting room. He had his jacket off, his sleeves rolled, a glass of bourbon in one hand. He looked like himself. That was one of the things she would think about for weeks afterward. How completely himself he looked. Not guilty, not panicked, just Damian. The same jaw, the same posture, the same quiet authority that filled every room he entered. And standing beside him, close enough that their arms were nearly touching, was Vivian Cross. Vivian was wearing his robe. Not a guest robe. Not the white hotel-style ones Amara kept folded in the guest suite. His robe. The dark charcoal one with the small embroidered monogram on the chest that Amara had given him 4 birthdays ago. The one he wore every Sunday morning when he drank his coffee by the window and pretended for a few hours not to be the most dangerous man in the northeastern United States. Amara stood in the doorway and felt her mind go very, very quiet. Damian saw her first. She watched the recognition move across his face like a slow tide. Not shock, not guilt, more like a man calculating the weight of a problem he had not entirely expected to arrive this evening. His eyes moved to the bourbon in his hand, then back to her. He didn't lower the glass. Vivian turned around a half-second later. She had the kind of face built for situations exactly like this one. Beautiful in a way that was designed to intimidate other women, composed in a way that suggested she had rehearsed a version of this moment too. But something in her expression flickered when she saw Amara's face, because Amara was not crying. She was not shaking. She was not raising her voice. She was standing perfectly still in the doorway of her own home, with her heels in one hand and her evening bag in the other. And the expression on her face was the kind of calm that takes years of surviving hard things to develop. It was not peaceful. It was not forgiveness. It was the expression of a woman who had just finished understanding something and was now simply deciding what to do with that understanding. Amara. Damian said her name the way he said everything, like it was a statement, not a greeting. No apology in it, no explanation offered. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Vivian. Then she looked at the robe. She walked into the room slowly and set her evening bag on the side table. She opened the small clasp with 2 fingers. She reached inside and removed her wedding ring. The Asher-cut diamond and the platinum band that Damian had placed on her finger 7 years ago in a church in Harlem with her grandmother sitting in the front row and his entire organization standing in the back. She set the ring on the table beside her bag. The sound it made against the marble was very small, almost nothing, like a period at the end of a sentence that had taken years to write. "I'm not going to make a scene," she said. Her voice was level. "That's not who I am, and you know that." Damian set his glass down. "Let me explain. You don't need to?" She looked at him directly. "Not with hate. Something worse than hate. I understand everything I need to understand." Vivian opened her mouth. "Don't," Amara said. Just that one word, quiet and absolute, and Vivian closed her mouth. Amara picked up her evening bag, without the ring, and walked toward the staircase. She moved through that house the way she had always moved through it, with her back straight and her steps measured, because she had learned a long time ago that dignity is not something you feel in moments like this. It's something you choose, and then you pay for it later, in private, where no one can see the cost. She went upstairs. She packed one bag. Not everything she owned, just what she needed for the next few days, the next week, however long it took for her to build a floor beneath herself that wasn't made from someone else's promises. Her hands were steady the whole time. She had learned to separate her hands from the rest of her. Damian came to the doorway of their bedroom while she was pulling her coat from the closet. He stood there the way men like him always stand in doorways, taking up space, filling the frame, as if their size alone could stop things from happening. "You're not leaving," she looked at him. "Tell me something true. Right now. One true thing." He was quiet too long. "That's what I thought," she said. "I made a mistake." "Yes." She zipped the bag. "You made a lot of them. The mistake tonight is just the first one I have proof of." His jaw tightened. "Amara." "I'm not angry at you, Damian." And the terrible part, the part that made him actually step back from the doorway, was that she meant it. "I'm finished. There's a difference." She walked past him. He didn't stop her. Up. Maybe because he still believed, the way men who have never truly lost anything always believe, that this was something he could fix in the morning. Maybe because some part of him recognized, for the first time in a very long time, that he had no leverage here. No threat, no negotiation, no back-channel deal he could arrange to make this go the way he wanted. She walked out of his house. She did not look back. The night air hit her face like cold water, and for 3 seconds, just 3, her composure cracked down the middle. Her throat closed. Her eyes burned. She stood on the top step of her own front entrance and pressed one hand flat against her sternum and breathed through it, because that is what you do when your whole life splits along a seam you didn't know was there. You breathe through it. You don't let it drop you in the driveway. Then she called a car and waited and did not cry. Inside the house, Damian stood in the middle of the master bedroom for a very long time. He was not used to the feeling that arrived now, the slow, hollow spreading in his chest that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite emptiness, but was something between the two. He had felt fear before, the useful kind, the kind that sharpens a man and makes him precise. This was not that. This was the fear of a room where a presence has been removed and you cannot fill the space with anything you own. He walked to the window. Her car was pulling out of the long driveway. He watched the taillights disappear and then kept watching the dark road long after they were gone. Downstairs, Vivian was still in his robe. He had forgotten she was there. That, more than anything, told him something he wasn't ready to hear. 3 weeks passed. Damian sent flowers. Amara donated them. He sent a car to wait outside her apartment building, a sublet in Morningside Heights, that one of her old colleagues had found for her within 48 hours of her making a single phone call. That was the thing about Amara that Damian had always known, but never properly respected. She had built her own network. Quietly, over years, the way women who understand that power can be taken from them always do. She had her own people, her own loyalty systems, and none of them were on his payroll. The car sat outside for 4 days. She used the back entrance. He tried calling from 3 different numbers. She did not answer any of them. He left one voicemail, then stopped, because listening to a phone ring endlessly in a line that will never connect is a particular humiliation that even a man like Damian Voss could only absorb so many times before it changed him. What changed him was not the silence itself. It was what the silence revealed. He had never had to wait for anything, not since he was 19 years old and still fighting his way out of a Bronx neighborhood that killed 3 of his closest friends before they were old enough to vote. He had clawed and calculated and constructed an empire specifically so that he would never again be the person standing outside someone else's door with nothing to offer but himself. He had believed, somewhere beneath all the layers of strategy and reputation and carefully managed fear, that he had solved the problem of powerlessness, that he had outbuilt it. Amara had just shown him he had not. She was not punishing him. That was the part he couldn't quite accept. Punishment implies that the person doing it still cares enough to want you to suffer, still wants something from you. Pain, remorse, some visible consequence that proves they mattered. Amara didn't want his suffering. She wasn't waiting to see him broken. She was simply gone. And the space she left behind was not the space of a woman who had been wounded and run away. It was the space of a woman who had made a decision. He started showing up at his office earlier and staying later, because the house had a quality to it now that he could not name and could not stand. Everything was still in its place. The furniture, the art she had chosen, the way the kitchen smelled on Tuesday mornings when the cleaning crew came. All of it the same. All of it wrong. A stage set for a life that was no longer being performed. He stopped seeing Vivian within the first week. It was not a dramatic ending. No confrontation, no speeches. He simply stopped returning her calls. He had discovered, in the long, quiet hours after Amara left, that he had no idea why he had allowed Vivian into his life in the first place. When he tried to reconstruct it honestly, what he found was not passion or even genuine desire, but something more like distraction. She had been loud and available and undemanding in the ways that mattered, and he had been a man who was tired in a way he could not admit to anyone, including himself. And tired men make terrible decisions and call them choices. He understood that now. It did not help. What happened next did not come through any of his intelligence networks, which was the most disturbing part. No operative, no informant, no carefully placed associate brought him the information. It arrived through a lawyer, a formal communication, clean and precise, the way Amara handled everything. Inside was documentation, evidence systematically gathered, showing that over the past 14 months, a significant portion of his organization's internal communications had been compromised. Names, dates, transaction records, a map of exactly where the leaks were and who had constructed them. At the center of the map was Vivian Cross. Damian sat with the documents for a long time. He read them twice. He cross-referenced 3 of the data points against his own records to confirm they were accurate. They were. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the specific architecture of what Amara had done. She had found this. She had compiled it. She had organized it into something a man could act on. And then she had sent it to him through a lawyer, cleanly, with no personal note, no leverage attached, no request for anything in return. She had handed him the means to protect everything he had built, the empire she had stood beside him through, the organization she had helped legitimize, the future she had believed in before he destroyed her reason to, and she had asked for nothing. She had protected him after what he did. His chest did something then that he was not going to describe to anyone, not ever, not even to himself in the hours past midnight when the house was completely silent, and he was the only person awake in it. But it happened, and afterward he was not quite the same man he had been before it. He called his lawyer. "I need to find her," he said. "Mr. Voss," the lawyer said carefully. "She's made it clear she doesn't want—" "I know what she wants." He was quiet for a moment. "I need you to find out if she's safe." There was a pause on the other end of the line, long enough to mean something. "The documents she sent you," the lawyer said. "She made enemies getting that information, Damian." Damian's hand tightened on the phone. "What kind of enemies?" The lawyer took a breath. And somewhere across the city, in a small apartment in Morningside Heights, Amara Bellamy stood at her window and looked out at the street below, where a car she didn't recognize had been parked across from her building for the second night in a row. She had noticed it yesterday. She had not told anyone. She was already thinking about what to do next. The car was a black Escalade with tinted windows and no plates visible from the angle of her window. Amara had noticed it at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, and again at 6:14 this morning. She knew those two details because she had written them down on a notepad beside her bed. The same notepad she used to log the small practical details of rebuilding a life, grocery lists, appointment times, the name of the locksmith she'd called to replace both deadbolts the day she moved in. She was not a woman who panicked, but she was also not a woman who confused calmness with carelessness. She stepped back from the window and sat down at her kitchen table with her coffee and looked at the notepad and thought it through the way she thought through everything, methodically, without the luxury of denial. The documents she had compiled and sent to Damian had not come easily. 14 months of quiet observation inside a world she was never supposed to be mapping, conversations she was not supposed to remember, access to files she had technically obtained through her role in the legitimate side of his business. She had done it carefully. She had done it without telling a single person. She had also, clearly, not been as invisible as she believed. Her phone was on the table. She looked at it for a moment, then picked it up and called the one number she trusted without reservation. It rang twice. Amara? The voice on the other end was a woman's, but low, unhurried, with a Brooklyn edge that 20 years in corporate law had not entirely smoothed out. Celeste Okafor, her oldest friend. The only person on earth who had known Amara since before Damian, before the Empire, before the version of herself that had been slowly constructed around loving a man who moved through the world like a controlled explosion. "I need your eyes on something," Amara said. "Can you come tonight?" A beat. "How bad?" "I don't know yet. That's the problem. I'll be there at 7. No further questions. That was Celeste. Amara ended the call and looked out the window again. The Escalade hadn't moved. She got dressed, took the back stairs down through the building's service exit, and walked 3 blocks east before hailing a cab. She did this not because she was certain she was being followed, but because certainty, in the world she had lived inside for 7 years, was a luxury that got people killed. Damian had taught her that without meaning to. She had absorbed it the way you absorb everything in a long marriage, not through lessons, but through proximity to the way another person's mind works. She went to her office. The office was a sublet space on the 4th floor of a building in Midtown that she shared with 2 other small businesses, a graphic design firm and an import consultant. Her company had been registered for 11 weeks. She had 3 clients. The work was real, the revenue was modest, and every dollar of it belonged entirely to her, which made it the most valuable money she had ever held. She was at her desk by 9. By 10:30, she had taken 2 client calls, reviewed a contract, and drafted a response to a proposal that she would normally have spent 3 days considering. She was operating on the kind of focused efficiency that only arrives when the rest of your life has been stripped back to the essentials, and you discover, with some surprise, that you are more capable than the comfortable years allowed you to demonstrate. Her assistant, a 26-year-old named Jordan, who asked no personal questions and made extraordinary coffee, knocked at 11 and said, "There's a man downstairs asking for you. He's not on the schedule. He says his name is Reeves." Amara didn't move for a moment. Description: tall, gray suit. He looks like someone who used to be important and wants you to know it. She recognized the name. Marcus Reeves. Damian's second. The man who had been at his right hand for 11 years and had, in Amara's measured assessment, exactly 2 genuine loyalties in his entire life, to Damian's money and to his own survival, in that order. "Send him up," she said. He came through the door looking exactly the way Jordan had described. A man whose authority lived in the posture more than the face, slightly past his best years, but not enough to matter yet. He wore the gray suit well. He had a way of moving through a room that suggested he had already assessed every exit before you noticed him doing it. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "Bellamy," she said. "Sit down or don't. Either way, you have about 4 minutes." He sat. He looked around her office once, not with disrespect, more like a man calibrating, and then he looked at her. "You saw the car. 2 nights. It's not ours." "I know it's not yours. If it were yours, I wouldn't have seen it." She kept her voice level. "Who is it?" Reeves leaned forward slightly and rested his forearms on his knees. For a man of his particular background, it was a relatively open gesture. "You sent Damian those documents." "I did." "You know what was in them." I compiled them. I know exactly what's in them. He looked at her steadily. Then you know that the people named in those documents are aware that someone put that information together. They don't know it was you yet, but they're looking. Amara held his gaze. How long do I have before they figure it out? We think a week, maybe less. He paused. Damian wants to move you somewhere safer. No. Mrs. Bell, no. She said it the same way she'd said it to Vivian that night. One word, complete, without heat. I'm not going to disappear into one of his safe houses while he manages the situation. I'm not going back to being someone he protects. That chapter is finished. Reeves studied her for a moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not admiration exactly, more like the recalibration of a man who has been operating on an outdated assessment. Then what do you want to do? I want information. Specifically, I want to know how Vivian Cross connected to the people in those documents. Because I found the financial trail and I found the communication records, but I couldn't find the original point of contact. Someone introduced her. Someone with access to both sides. Reeves was very still for a moment. The kind of still that means the person is deciding how much truth the situation requires. That's something Damian needs to hear directly, he said. Then tell Damian to come himself. Another pause. He didn't think you'd see him. I know he didn't. She looked at Reeves without blinking. Tell him he's right, but tell him I'm not hiding, and I'm not asking for his protection. And if he wants to have a conversation about what I know, he knows where I am. I'll give him 20 minutes. She stood up. You've used your 4 minutes, Marcus. He stood. He was almost to the door when he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, not quite turning around, you were the only thing in that house that was real. Most of us knew it. She didn't respond to that. She waited until the door closed and then sat back down and pressed both hands flat on the desk and breathed slowly, the way you do when you are not going to let something land on you right now because you cannot afford the weight of it. Damian came at 4 p.m. He came alone, which she had not expected. No security, no car waiting at the curb with the engine running. He walked through the front door of her building and took the elevator up and knocked on the glass door of her office with one knuckle. And when she buzzed him in, he stepped inside and stood in the middle of the room with his coat still on like a man who has not yet decided if he has the right to stay. He looked tired. That was the first thing she noticed, and she noticed it against her will. The particular exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep, but from carrying something too heavy for too long. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He had not shaved for several days. For a man who had spent the better part of a decade being the most controlled presence in any room, he looked remarkably undone. She did not let that soften her. Sit down, she said, and take your coat off. You're not leaving in the first 5 minutes. He took the coat off. He sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office was quiet, except for the low sound of the city coming through the window. Traffic, a distant horn, the specific white noise of New York in the middle of a Thursday afternoon that made everything feel both urgent and strangely removed from consequence. Reeves told me what you said, Damian started. I know what I said. You think someone introduced Vivian, someone internal. I don't think it. I know it. The financial transfers I found start 8 months before Vivian entered your inner circle. The account they route through belongs to a shell company registered in Delaware, but the signatory on the original incorporation documents is a name that appears in your own payroll records from 4 years ago. She opened a folder on her desk and pushed it across to him. Page 3. He opened it. He read for a moment. Something moved across his face that she recognized as the expression of a man finding a splinter he had been walking on so long he stopped noticing the limp. This is one of my accountants, he said. Flat, no question in it. Was, she said. He left your employment 14 months ago, right around the time the communication leak started. Damian looked up from the folder. His eyes were dark and entirely focused, the way they got when a problem became real enough to require his full attention rather than just his management. How did you find this? Because I was there, she said simply. I was in every meeting. I saw every budget review. I sat next to you at every dinner where you talked to people you shouldn't have trusted, and I watched their faces while they agreed with everything you said. I spent 7 years being the most observant person in every room we walked into together. She held his gaze. You just never asked what I was observing. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car horn flared and faded. Why did you send it to me? He asked. After everything, you could have taken this to someone else, federal level. You could have burned the whole thing down and walked away clean. Yes. So why didn't you? She looked at him steadily. Because burning it down would have hurt people who didn't deserve to be burned. The people who work for you who are just working. The legitimate businesses. The employees who have nothing to do with any of this. She paused. That's the only reason. He absorbed that. She watched him absorb it, watched him understand that it was not mercy toward him, that it was not love remaining, that it was the moral clarity of a woman who makes decisions based on what is right rather than what is satisfying, even when satisfying would have been completely justified. I ended it with Vivian, he said. I heard. I want to explain, Damian. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. Explaining what happened with Vivian is not what this meeting is about. I don't need that information. It doesn't change anything that matters. His jaw tightened. For a moment she could see the effort it took him to sit still. This man who handled difficulty by moving through it, by deploying resources, by converting every problem into a series of solvable steps. This was not that kind of problem, and some part of him was finally beginning to understand what that meant. What has changed something? He asked. Quiet, almost careful. She looked at him for a long moment. Whether you're honest about what really happened inside your organization, not the Vivian part, the part before that, the part where someone got close enough to compromise your operation for over a year and you didn't notice because you were too busy managing your reputation to look at your foundation. He didn't say anything. You trusted the wrong people, she said, and you stopped trusting the right ones. That's how this happened, not because of one bad actor, because you created the conditions for it. The silence between them stretched out. It was not comfortable. It was the silence of a room where two people are both looking at the same truth from different positions, and the view is not flattering from either angle. The car outside your building, he said finally. I have people who can... I know you do. She closed the folder. And I'll tell you exactly what I know, and I'll help you find the connection you're missing, because I believe it's the right thing to do, and because people could get hurt if this doesn't get resolved. But I am not going to do that from inside one of your safe houses. I'm going to do it from here, from my office, from my life, with my own people involved. She looked at him directly. If that's not acceptable to you, then we have nothing more to discuss. Damian looked at her for a long time. The exhausted man behind the controlled face. The person she had known before the Empire got heavy enough to change the shape of him. Okay, he said. It was the first time she had heard that word from him without a condition attached to it. She nodded once. There's a name I haven't been able to locate. It appears once in the communication chain. A contact ID, no real name. Whoever it is, they're the person who connected your former accountant to the people who eventually sent Vivian into your circle. If we find them, we find the whole architecture of what was built against you. She turned her laptop toward him. I've been trying to trace the ID for 3 weeks. I've hit a wall. He leaned forward and looked at the screen. His eyes moved across the data quickly, with the focus of someone who had spent a long time learning to read information that was not supposed to be readable. I know this format, he said. Slowly, like a man placing a sound he's heard before but can't immediately place. This encoding, I've seen this before. Where? He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not blank but full, a man moving through his own memory with some urgency, opening doors in sequence. Reeves, he said. Amara went very still. Not Reeves himself, he said quickly, looking up, but this encoding style. It was used in a system that Reeves built 3 years ago for secure internal communications. After we moved away from it, the architecture was supposed to be deleted. He looked at the screen again. It wasn't deleted. Someone kept it running. Someone who knew the original system well enough to modify it. Who had access to the original build? Amara asked. He was already reaching for his phone. 2 people, he said. Reeves and someone Reeves hired, a contractor. We used her for about 8 months and then the project ended and she moved on. He was scrolling through contacts, his jaw set in the way it got when he was moving toward a decision. She was good. Too good to disappear quietly. I always thought it was strange that she just stopped. What was her name? He found what he was looking for and held the phone out so she could see the screen. Amara looked at the name. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at Damian. "That's my new client," she said. The room got very quiet. Amara's mind moved fast. She could feel it happening, the rapid reorganization of information, the 3-week timeline of the company, the client who had approached her directly 2 weeks after she opened, who had been personable and professional and had paid the first invoice immediately, without question, without the usual back and forth. The client who asked, during their first meeting, very specific questions about Amara's previous work and previous access to certain financial structures, and who Amara had answered carefully, giving nothing that wasn't publicly available, but who had been in this office, who had seen Amara's setup, her files, her second laptop on the left side of the desk, who had last Tuesday asked to use the restroom and been gone for 11 minutes. Amara stood up. "She was here yesterday," she said. Her voice was even, but her mind was already 3 steps ahead, already running back through the layout of the office, the position of her devices, the files she had opened on Tuesday, what was visible on her screen when she stepped out to take a call. Damian was already standing. "Is your system?" "I don't know." She moved to her desk and opened her laptop and began moving through the security logs with the rapid precision of someone who has thought about this possibility without letting herself fully prepare for it. She pulled up the access history. She looked at the timestamps. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. An internal file had been opened from her secondary drive. She had been on the phone at 2:47 p.m. She accessed something, Amara said. Her voice was flat. Not panicked, just flat. The way it gets when something you were afraid of becomes real and you no longer have the energy to be afraid of it because now you have to deal with it. I need to know what she took. Damian was behind her now, looking at the screen, close enough that she could hear him breathing. What was on the secondary drive? Amara's hands paused above the keyboard. Everything, she said. All of it. Everything I compiled over 14 months. Every document, every financial record, every communication log. She looked at the screen. If she copied that drive, then whoever sent her knows exactly what I know. They know every piece of evidence that exists, and they know I'm the one who put it together. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Damian's phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed in a way Amara had not seen in a very long time. The color leaving, something cold arriving in its place, the expression of a man receiving information that rearranges everything he thought he had under control. He answered. He listened for 15 seconds without speaking. Then he lowered the phone and looked at her. "They have Celeste," he said. Amara felt the room tilt. Not physically, just in the way the air pressure changes when something lands that you cannot absorb in real time. Celeste, who was coming at 7. Celeste, who had known Amara since before any of this existed, who had nothing to do with any of it, who was entirely innocent of everything except the specific crime of being loved by someone who had made powerful enemies. She looked at Damian. He looked back at her. There was no going back from this. There was no version of the next hour in which Amara stepped away and let Damian handle it. No version in which she kept her independence and her distance and the careful architecture of the life she had been rebuilding. That life had just been reached through, and someone she loved had been pulled out of it. "Tell me everything you know about where they operate," she said. Her voice had changed. Not louder, not harder, exactly. Just different, stripped of everything except the thing underneath, which was not anger and was not fear, but was something that had no clean name and did not need one. Damian looked at her for one more second. Then he started talking. Damian talked for 11 minutes without stopping. Amara stood with her back against the desk and listened the way she had learned to listen in 7 years of being married to a man whose world ran on information, not just to the words, but to the sequence of them, the weight given to specific names, the places where his voice changed register by half a tone, and he was choosing what to include and what to leave in the space between sentences. She had become very good at reading those spaces. She let him finish. "The warehouse district," she said. "Hunt's Point." He looked at her. "How did you slowed down when you said the name of the street. You do that when something is real." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "How many people do you have that you actually trust? Not people on payroll, people you trust." He thought for exactly 2 seconds. 3. Call them. Tell them to meet us. Not at the location, somewhere close, somewhere neutral. I need 30 minutes before anyone moves. She was already checking her phone, already pulling up the message thread with Celeste that ended at 6:43 p.m. A single text that said, "On my way, bringing wine, don't argue." The casual brevity of a woman who had no idea what was waiting for her outside Amara's building. The specific innocence of that message was a weight Amara could not carry right now, so she set it down carefully in a part of her mind she would return to later and kept moving. 30 minutes to do what? Damian asked. To think. She looked at him. You move without thinking and we lose her. You know that. He picked up his phone. They went downstairs together. The street outside was ordinary. The specific ordinary of a Thursday evening in Midtown. People moving with the dense, purposeful energy of a city that has somewhere to be. Cabs threading through gaps. A food cart on the corner doing brisk business in the cold. Nothing about the evening knew what was happening inside it. Amara found that almost interesting, the way the world continues its complete indifference to the moments inside it that are breaking people in half. She did not look at the street the way she normally did. She looked at it like Damian had always looked at it, as a series of positions, sight lines, potential obstacles, the 3 doorways across the street that could conceal a person, the SUV double-parked 40 feet north that had been there since she came down and would need to be accounted for. 7 years of proximity to a man who saw every room as a tactical problem had left a residue in her she was only now discovering the practical use for. They walked north 2 blocks to a hotel bar that Damian apparently knew well enough to be recognized by the bartender, who showed them to a back corner without being asked. The 3 men arrived within 15 minutes of each other. Compact, quiet men who moved with the specific economy of people who have trained themselves not to take up more space than necessary. They sat down without being introduced. Amara didn't ask for introductions. She pulled up a city map on her phone and set it on the table. Talk me through the building layout, she said to Damian. He did. He was precise. Square footage, entry points, the loading dock on the east side that was typically used for movement after midnight, the security setup on the upper level. One of the quiet men added 2 corrections that Damian accepted without comment, which told her the man had been inside the building recently. She noted that and kept going. They called to tell you they had her, she said, which means they want something in exchange. What did they ask for? Damian's jaw tightened. The documents. All of it. Everything I sent you. Yes. And what happens after they get the documents? He didn't answer immediately. Damian, she looked at him directly. What happens after? There are no guarantees, he said. Low, even, the voice of a man stating a fact he would prefer not to have to state. The table was quiet. Amara looked down at the map and breathed once, slowly, through her nose. Celeste had been in her life for 23 years. She had been at Amara's mother's funeral. She had driven 4 hours through a snowstorm the night Amara called her from the parking lot of a hospital at 2 in the morning 7 years ago, when Damian had been shot, and Amara had held his hand in the back of a car and prayed silently with more intensity than she had ever prayed for anything. Celeste had arrived with coffee and a spare coat and had not asked a single question except, "Are you okay?" and had stayed until morning. We're not giving them the documents, Amara said. Everyone at the table looked at her. If we give them the documents, they destroy them, and then there is nothing stopping them from doing whatever they planned to do from the beginning. The documents are the only leverage. The only reason Celeste is still alive right now is because they need what we have. The moment we hand it over, we lose the only reason they have to keep her safe. She looked at Damian. You know I'm right. He looked back at her. The exhaustion in his face had been replaced by something else. Not the controlled authority she was used to, but something rawer than that. A man trying to hold 2 impossible things at the same time. The logic she was presenting, which he could not argue with, and the specific horror of agreeing with it. Then what's the play? One of the quiet men asked. His voice was flat, professional. We give them something that looks like the documents, Amara said. We buy enough time to get Celeste out before they realize it's not real. She looked at Damian. Can your people replicate the file structure convincingly enough to hold up for 10 minutes of visual inspection? Maybe, Damian said. I need better than maybe. 20 minutes, one of the other men said, if I know what format I'm replicating. Amara turned her phone toward him and opened one of the document files. He looked at it for about 8 seconds. I can do it, he said. Not a boast, just information. Good. She turned back to the map. Now, getting Celeste out. Walk me through the East Dock. They planned for 22 minutes. It was not a comfortable plan. It had too many moving parts, and at least 3 moments where someone's physical presence in a specific place at a specific time was the difference between the whole thing working and the whole thing collapsing. Amara knew this. She built the plan anyway because the alternative was no plan, and no plan was the same as surrender, and she was not built for surrender. When they stood up to leave, Damian put a hand on her arm. Not restraining, just contact. She looked at the hand and then looked at him. You're not coming into that building, he said. Yes, I am. Amara, she's there because of me. Her voice was very quiet. I'm not going to sit somewhere safe while other people go in and get her out. That's not who I am, and you know it. He held her gaze for a moment longer. Then he released her arm. They went. The drive to Hunts Point took 31 minutes through traffic that seemed, at every light, personally determined to make them wait. Amara sat in the back seat and looked out the window and thought about Celeste sitting in a warehouse somewhere ahead of them being afraid. And then she stopped thinking about it because it was not useful and she needed every clear thought she had. She thought instead about the documents, about the 14 months she had spent assembling them, about the specific chain of evidence that led from the shell company in Delaware back through the accountant and the contractor, and forward to whoever had built the architecture of this conspiracy from the beginning. She had the full picture now, or almost the full picture. There was still the question Damian had raised, the original point of contact, the person who first connected the accountant to the network. She had a theory about that. She had not shared it yet, because the theory, if she was right, was going to land very hard on someone in the car with her, and she had wanted to be certain before she said it out loud. She looked at the back of Damian's head in the front seat. She was almost certain. The warehouse came into view at 8:17 p.m., a long, low structure set back from the street behind a chain-link fence. The kind of building that had probably been a legitimate shipping operation at some point in the previous 2 decades and had been converted to other purposes, gradually enough that no single decision felt dramatic. The loading dock on the east side was visible from the corner where they parked. 2 men outside. That matched what they'd expected. The plan began. The quiet man with the replicated files made the call from 2 blocks away, telling the people inside that they were ready to exchange. Damian and the other 2 men moved into position around the perimeter. Amara took the east side. She had been very clear with Damian about this. She was not going to be positioned somewhere safe while things happened around her. She was going to be at the point where Celeste came out, because Celeste had never been in a situation like this in her entire life, and the first face she needed to see when she came through that door needed to be someone she trusted. Damian had not liked it. He had agreed. The exchange meeting was set for the loading dock, which meant the people inside would move toward the front of the building to receive the handoff, which meant the east dock would have less traffic for a window of roughly 4 to 6 minutes. One of the quiet men went in through a side access point that apparently had a lock he knew how to persuade. He was looking for Celeste. Amara waited. She had positioned herself in the shadow of a concrete pillar where she could see the east door without being visible from it. The cold had settled in seriously now, the specific damp cold of a New York night near water, and she was grateful for her coat and furious at herself for being grateful for something so small when her best friend was inside that building. She waited 4 minutes. The east door opened. Celeste came through it walking under her own power, which was the first thing, the thing that mattered most. The thing Amara felt arrived somewhere in the center of her chest as a physical loosening of something that had been clenched since Damian said her name. Behind Celeste was the quiet man. He had his hand at the small of her back, not restraining, guiding. Amara stepped out from the shadow. Celeste saw her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Celeste covered the distance between them at a pace that was almost running, and Amara caught her by both arms and held on. And Celeste said something against her shoulder that wasn't quite words, more like the sound a person makes when the worst of something is over and the body finally starts releasing what it's been holding. "I've got you," Amara said. "I've got you. Can you walk?" "I can walk," Celeste said. Her voice was rough. "I'm fine. They didn't—" She pulled back slightly and looked at Amara's face. "You came yourself." "Of course I came myself." Celeste looked at her for a moment with an expression Amara could not entirely read. "There's something you need to know," she said. Low, urgent. The cadence of someone who has been holding information for hours and cannot hold it any longer. "They talked. While I was there. They didn't think it mattered because they thought—" She stopped. "Tell me," Amara said. "They thought I didn't understand what they were saying. They switched languages halfway through. But I speak enough to follow." Celeste held her gaze. "Amara, the person who commissioned all of this, the one at the top, they have a name for him. They kept calling him the architect." The quiet man had appeared beside them. "We need to move," he said. "1 second," Amara said. To Celeste, "Did they say anything else about him? Anything I can use to identify—" "They said he was inside," Celeste said. "Not inside the building. Inside the organization. Damian's organization. They said the architect has been there for years." The quiet man's hand came down on Amara's shoulder. "Mrs. Bellamy, we have a problem." She looked at him. His face had changed. He had his earpiece in, and whatever had come through it had done something to the surface composure of a man who was very good at having no surface. "What happened?" "The exchange went wrong," he said. "They checked the files. They know it's a replica." He paused. 3 of them are heading for the East Dock. Right now." Amara looked at the door behind them. Then she took Celeste's arm and they moved. They went north along the building's exterior, moving fast. The quiet man ahead of them, with a specific attention to the darkness that Amara recognized as someone who had trained for exactly this. She focused on the ground. Uneven surface, broken asphalt, pools of standing water black in the low light. And she kept her grip on Celeste's arm steady because Celeste was holding together remarkably well for a woman who had spent 3 hours in a warehouse but was moving with a slight hitch in her step that suggested she had been sitting on a hard floor for most of that time, and her legs were not entirely cooperating. Behind them, a door opened. Voices. Rapid. Sharp. The quiet man turned a corner and they followed, and there was a car there, engine running, one of the other men behind the wheel. And they got in and the car was moving before the door fully closed, and Amara turned to look out the rear window at the space they had just left. 3 figures in the loading dock light. The car turned north and the warehouse disappeared. Amara faced forward and processed what Celeste had told her at a speed she could not slow down if she tried. The architect, years inside the organization, a person with access deep enough and long enough to construct 14 months of infiltration and remain invisible throughout. She ran the list she had been running in her head for weeks, the people inside Damian's operation who met the criteria, and arrived again at the same place she had arrived before. The same name, the same person who had been in her office, the same person she had answered questions for over 2 meetings and now understood had not been asking about her previous work at all. She had been asking about what Amara knew, and how much of it she had told Reeves. The car hit the highway and the city opened up around them, and Amara took out her phone and looked at the screen. She had 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. She did not call it back. She opened her contacts instead and scrolled to a name and stared at it for a long moment. Then she called Damian. He picked up on the first ring. "She's safe?" "She's safe. She's with me." Amara kept her voice even. "Where are you?" "Front of the building. The exchange fell apart. They know what—" "I know. Listen to me." She paused, and in the pause she made the decision she had been building toward for the last 40 minutes. The decision to say the thing she was not yet entirely certain of, but was certain enough. The architect. The person behind all of this. I know who it is. Silence on the other end. "Tell me," he said. His voice had dropped. No inflection. The specific flatness of a man preparing for something he already senses is going to be very bad. "Where is Reeves right now?" she asked. A longer silence. "He was coordinating from the north perimeter," Damian said slowly. "I haven't heard from him since the exchange fell apart." "Check his position," Amara said. "Right now. Check where he is." She heard Damian moving, heard him asking someone else, heard the specific quality of background sound that meant people outdoors, then a longer pause, then footsteps, then a door, then nothing. "Damian?" He's gone," Damian said. Flat, absolutely flat. The voice of a man who has just placed a weight on a scale and found the number. "Marcus Reeves built the communication system," Amara said. "The encoding that showed up in the files I sent you. You said 2 people had access to the original architecture. Reeves and the contractor he hired." "Oich," she breathed once. "I think Reeves didn't just build the system. I think he never stopped running it. I think the contractor was his, the accountant was his, Vivian was his, and everything that came after was his. I think he has been the architect from the beginning." The car was on the highway now, moving north through a city that had no idea what was happening inside it, and beside her Celeste had gone very still with the look of a woman who is trying to determine how much worse things are than she already understood them to be. Amara's phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. She opened it. 4 words and an address. "You left something behind." She looked at the address. Then she looked up and her face did something she could not stop. Something she had kept locked down for the entire night through every cold calculation and careful breath and deliberate act of composing herself against whatever came next. Her face broke, just briefly, just for a second, before she rebuilt it. Because the address in the text was her office. And the only thing she had left behind tonight, the only thing she had not been able to bring with her when Damian called and everything moved faster than she planned, was the laptop with the backup drive. The one thing she had not replicated, the original files. Reeves had them. And if Reeves had the original files, then every piece of evidence she had spent 14 months assembling, every document, every financial record, every communication log that could expose the entire conspiracy and the people behind it, all of it was now in the hands of the man she had just identified as the architect of everything she had been trying to destroy. They had lost. In 1 hour, from the inside, by a man who had been 3 feet from Damian for 11 years and had spent the entire time building the machine that was now going to take everything apart. Amara sat in the back of the moving car with the cold coming through the window seam and her best friend's hand in hers and the phone with 4 words on its screen, and she looked at the back of the driver's head and thought, not with panic, not with grief, but with the particular clarity that arrives only when everything else has been stripped away and there is nothing left to protect and nowhere left to retreat. That if she was going to finish this, she was going to have to stop trying to do it the clean way. She was going to have to become something she had spent her whole life deciding she would never be. She was going to have to think exactly like Damian. She told the driver to turn around. He looked at her in the rearview mirror and didn't move. "I said turn around." Her voice had a quality she did not recognize in herself. Not loud, not aggressive, but with an absolute absence of the usual negotiating tone that people use when they are making a request. This was not a request. The driver turned around. Celeste grabbed her arm. "Amara, what are you doing?" "My office." "They'll be there. I know they'll be there." She was already on the phone, already calling Damian back. He picked up before the first ring finished. "I need you at my office building. Side entrance, service door, 20 minutes. "Amara, if Reeves has the files, then going back there is exactly what he... I know what it is." She watched the highway median blurring past the window. "I also know something Reeves doesn't know I know." "Tell me." "There's a second backup." She said it quietly. Not because Celeste couldn't hear. Celeste had earned the right to hear everything at this point. But because saying it at full volume felt like it would make it too real, too fragile, too susceptible to the specific cruelty of things that seem like solutions right up until the moment they aren't. "I made a copy 2 days ago. Physical drive. It's not in my office." Damian was quiet for a second. "Where is it?" Somewhere Reeves has never been and has no reason to look, she paused. But I need the original files back anyway. Not for the evidence. I have that. I need them back because if Reeves walks out of my office with those files, he's going to know within an hour that they're the original and that I have a copy somewhere, and then the game changes completely. He'll go dark. He'll move everything and everyone before we can get to any of it. She pressed 2 fingers against the space between her eyes. Right now, he thinks he won. I need him to keep thinking that until we're in position. You want to walk into a building where Reeves is waiting? I want to walk into a building where Reeves thinks he's won, and I'm coming because I have no other option. She looked out the window at the city moving past. There's a difference. Another pause. She could hear Damian breathing, not the controlled, measured breathing of the man who ran boardrooms and settled disputes with a look, but the breathing of someone moving fast in a cold night. 20 minutes, he said. 19 now. She ended the call. Celeste was looking at her with an expression that contained several emotions stacked on top of each other and not enough time to separate them. Tell me what I can do, Celeste said. Nothing. Amara, I need you out of this, completely out. She turned to face her. Not because I think you can't handle it, because you are the only completely clean person left in this situation, and I need one person who is clean. When this is over, if this works, there will be questions. Investigators. People who want to understand what happened from the beginning. You're going to be the one who can tell that story without anything complicated in it. Celeste looked at her for a long moment. You're going to use me as a witness. I'm going to use you as the truth. She squeezed her hand once. Driver, there's a Marriott on 45th. Drop this woman there and put the room on whatever card you have. Damian's people will cover it. She looked at Celeste. Don't use your phone for anything except calling me. Don't open the door for anyone. Order food from the hotel kitchen and stay inside. And if I don't hear from you by morning, Amara held her gaze, then call the number I'm going to text you right now and give the person who answers everything I told you about the documents, the shell company, Reeves, and the contractor. Everything. In order. Who is it? Someone at a federal level who has been trying to get traction on Damian's organization for 6 years. She watched Celeste absorb that. The information will end several things, including some things that were mine. She said it evenly, without self-pity, the way you say a true thing when you have already finished grieving it privately and are now simply reporting it. But the right people will go to prison and the wrong ones will go home. That's the trade. The car stopped in front of the hotel. Celeste did not get out immediately. She looked at Amara with 23 years of friendship in her face, all of it compressed into an expression that was not quite fear and not quite admiration, and was mostly just the look of a person who loves someone and is watching them walk towards something terrible and cannot stop it. Come back, Celeste said. Working on it, Amara said. Celeste got out. The car kept moving. Amara had 17 minutes. She used them. She pulled up the building layout for her office on her phone. She had downloaded it 6 weeks ago when she first signed the sublet. The habit of a woman who had spent years in rooms that belonged to dangerous people and had learned to know the geography before she needed it. She identified 3 things: the primary stairwell, the freight elevator that the building used for after-hours deliveries, and the emergency access panel on the 4th floor that she had noticed on her second day and mentally filed as relevant at some undefined future point. The future point was now. She texted Damian the freight elevator access code that the building manager had given her during onboarding and which she had written in the back of the same notepad where she had logged the Escalade's appearance. Then she sat back and let herself be still for 90 seconds, because stillness is not passivity. Stillness is the thing you do before intensity, to make sure the intensity is accurate rather than just loud. She thought about Reeves. 11 years beside Damian. 11 years of access, proximity, trust. 11 years of watching a man build something from the ground up and choosing to hollow it out from the inside simultaneously. The patience required for that was staggering. She tried to understand it not morally. She did not have time for the moral dimension right now, but tactically. A man who had operated with that level of patience and that level of concealment for that long did not rattle easily. He would be in her office right now in a state of controlled confidence. the confidence of a man who has moved his most important piece to the dominant position on the board and is now simply waiting for the clock to confirm what he already knows. She needed to give him something that felt like confirmation. She needed to arrive looking like what he expected, a woman who had run out of options and come back for the only thing left to bargain with. She could do that. She had spent years performing composure in rooms where she felt none. Performing need in a room where she felt something considerably more dangerous than need was a different direction on the same skill. The building was dark on the outside in the way that buildings get late in the evening when the last cleaning crew has finished and not yet left. A couple of lights on in upper floors, the lobby lit by fluorescents, the street outside quieter than it had been 3 hours ago. Amara had the driver stop half a block east. She got out alone. She did not look for Damian's position. She would not know it even if she looked, which was the point. She walked to the main entrance and used her keycard and went inside. The lobby was empty. The security desk had a monitor and a half-eaten sandwich and no guard. She took the elevator up to 4. Alone. 30 seconds of vertical travel that were very quiet and very clear, the kind of clarity that sometimes lives right at the edge of something frightening, where the body has burned through panic and landed in something more useful on the other side. The elevator opened. Her office was lit. She could see it from the elevator. The frosted glass wall of her office and the light behind it. The specific desk lamp she kept on the left side. The shape of someone sitting in her chair. Sitting in her chair, at her desk, with the easy confidence of someone who has decided the space belongs to him now. She walked toward it. She pushed open the glass door. Marcus Reeves looked up at her from behind her desk. He looked exactly as he always had, composed, measured, the gray suit now with the tie loosened by 2 inches, which was the only sign that the evening had been long. Her laptop was open in front of him. The external drive was plugged into the side of it. On the screen, she could see the file structure she had built over 14 months, everything organized into folders by date and category, the whole architecture of evidence laid out in the cool blue light of the monitor. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he expected to arrive and is faintly pleased to have been right about. "Mrs. Bellamy," he said. Not Voss. He had updated her designation. She noted that. "Marcus?" She stepped inside. She did not look at the laptop. She looked at him. "How long?" He tilted his head slightly. A man deciding how honest to be now that the performance was over. "The full truth?" "Unless you want to waste both our time." "Longer than Damian would want to believe," he said. "Some of it predates you entirely." He leaned back in her chair, with the ease of someone who has been carrying a secret for so long that setting it down feels like relief rather than defeat. "I was never loyal to the organization. I was loyal to what the organization could become if it was managed by someone who understood it properly." "You mean yourself?" "I mean someone who wasn't sentimental." He looked at her evenly. Damian built something extraordinary. He also spent 12 years making emotional decisions about people who didn't deserve the consideration, including you, if I'm being direct. You brought Vivian in. Vivian was useful. She was also genuinely fond of him, in her way, which made it easier. "I didn't anticipate that you would find out about the financial chain." He said it without rancor, more like a man acknowledging a miscalculation on a project. "You're considerably sharper than the role you occupied suggested." "I occupied the role I was given," she said. "That's different from the role I was capable of." Something moved across his face. Not admiration. Men like Reeves did not run toward admiration. More like the recalibration she had seen in Damian's face earlier, the adjustment that happens when a person's model of you turns out to be running several versions behind reality. "What do you want?" he said. "I want the drive." "No." "I want the drive, and I want you to tell me what you plan to do with it." She moved closer to the desk. Not aggressive, measured, every step deliberate. "Not as negotiation. I genuinely want to know if you thought this through to the end, or if you got this far on momentum and haven't looked at what comes next." He studied her. Then, surprisingly, he answered, "The files get destroyed. The people named in them go back to operating without visibility. I restructure the upper level of Damian's organization under terms that are considerably more rational, He retains the nominal position. I retain the functional authority. He paused. It was always going to be this way. I was simply waiting for the right leverage point. And Celeste. A message. He said it without inflection. Not a threat to her specifically. A demonstration that the reach exists. Amara's hands were still at her sides. The anger was there. It was always there. It had been there since Damian said Celeste's name in her office 6 hours ago. But she had it on a very short leash, and the leash was holding because she needed it to hold for approximately 4 more minutes. What you built was very good, she said. She kept her voice neutral. The communication architecture, the layered shell structure, the way you used the contractor as a firewall between yourself and the financial chain. She watched his face. But you made one mistake. He waited. You built it to be invisible to Damian, she said. You spent 11 years understanding exactly how Damian sees and what he notices and what he overlooks. You designed the whole thing around his specific blind spots. She held his gaze. But you never once thought about mine. A pause. Barely a second. Reeves moved. He reached for the laptop to disconnect the drive, and Amara moved the same instant. Not for the laptop, for the power strip under the desk. The one she had crawled under to plug in on her first day and had noted ran the entire desk setup from a single point. She hit the switch. Everything went dark. The laptop screen, the desk lamp, all of it. In the sudden darkness, Reeves was on his feet, the chair rolling back hard into the window, and she could hear him moving around the side of the desk, and she was already going the other direction, hand on the edge of the desk tracking the surface by touch, getting between him and the door. Not because she could stop him physically. She was not that kind of fighter, but because she did not need to stop him physically. She just needed 30 more seconds. The office door opened. The light from the corridor flooded in, and Damian was in the doorway, and behind him the 2 quiet men from the hotel bar, and Marcus Reeves stopped moving entirely. The room held. Reeves looked at Damian. Something passed between them. 11 years of something, the complicated residue of a relationship that had been built on a lie from Reeves's side and on genuine trust from Damian's. And whatever that residue was, it did not resolve in this moment. It simply sat there between them, acknowledged, and terrible. How long? Damian said. Reeves looked at him without flinching. Whatever else he was not a man who flinched. Long enough that the answer won't help you. Damian's jaw was tight enough to be visible from across the room. His hands were at his sides and very still, which Amara knew, from 7 years of reading this man's body in difficult moments, was considerably more dangerous than if they had been moving. The drive, Damian said. Damian, Reeves started. Don't! One word. The same way Amara had said it to Vivian the night she came home early. Absolute. Closing the conversation before it opened. Reeves reached slowly to the laptop and disconnected the drive and held it out. One of the quiet men crossed the room and took it. Sit down, Damian said. Reeves sat down. In the chair that wasn't Amara's desk chair, the guest chair, the one on the other side of the desk, which mattered, Amara noticed, and she suspected Damian had noticed it too and had chosen the instruction deliberately. Amara moved to the desk and plugged the power strip back in. The lamp came on. She pulled the laptop toward her and checked the drive connection history. The files had been opened, but the copy function had not completed. Reeves had been in the process of duplicating the drive when she walked in, which meant he had the originals but had not yet made his own copy. She verified this twice. Then she looked up at Damian and gave a small nod that communicated exactly what needed to be communicated and nothing more. He absorbed it. His breathing shifted by a fraction. I want to understand something, Damian said. He had moved into the room now, around the side of the desk, and he stood in the space between the desk and the window, between Reeves and the only remaining exit that wasn't covered. It was not a threatening position exactly. It was something worse. The position of a man who has already made his decision and is now simply confirming it. Ask, Reeves said. Any of it real? 11 years, any single piece of it? The question landed differently than Amara expected. Not as anger, not as accusation, but as something genuine. A man who had lost something he actually valued, not just something he owned and needed to know if it had ever existed at all. Reeves was quiet for a moment, the longest pause she had heard from him all evening. "The work was real," he said finally. "What we built was real. I didn't manufacture my way through 11 years. I was there." He looked at Damian directly. "I just wanted it to end differently." "Differently meaning yours." "Differently meaning better managed." "Yes," he exhaled. "I never wanted to destroy you. I wanted to replace what you were doing with something more sustainable. The sentiment, the loyalty misallocated to people who didn't earn it, the years wasted on a woman who—" He stopped. The room temperature changed. Damian took one step forward. Amara said, "Don't." He stopped. Not because she had authority over him, because she said it and he listened to her, and that in the specific geometry of this room was the most significant thing that had happened all evening. Reeves looked between them. Something in his expression shifted. A man recalculating, realizing that the dynamic he had mapped between these two people was not the dynamic currently present in this room. "She found the communication chain," he said, almost to himself. "She compiled 14 months of evidence. She protected the organization while you were distracted." He looked at Damian. "And you almost threw that away." "I know what I almost threw away," Damian said. Quiet, flat, without any performance in it. "That's not your concern anymore." One of the quiet men had moved to the door, the other was still. Reeves looked at his own hands on his knees and seemed, for the first time in the evening, to be doing something that resembled accepting the position he was in. "What happens now?" he said. Not a question. More like a man saying the next line in a sequence. Damian looked at Amara. She looked back at him. This was the moment. She had thought about this moment in the car on the way here, the moment when it would come down to a choice between the way Damian had always handled threats and the way she believed the situation needed to be handled if anyone was going to come out of it clean on the other side. The old answer and the right answer. She had decided in the car which one she was going to argue for. She had also decided that if Damian refused, she was going to do something she had kept in reserve all night, a card she had not yet played, a call she had not yet made, a piece of the situation she had held back from Damian specifically because she needed to be able to use it independently if the moment required it. She hoped the moment did not require it. She looked at Damian for 2 seconds. He looked back at her. Then she said, "There's a way to end this that doesn't require you to make a decision tonight that you can't take back." He said nothing. He was listening. "The evidence on that drive is enough," she said. "Not just for Reeves, for everyone in the network. The shell companies, the accountant, the contractor, the people at the warehouse tonight. All of it, in the right hands, ends the whole structure." She kept her voice even. "There's a federal contact. Someone who has been building a parallel investigation for 6 years without enough to move. What I have fills every gap." She watched Damian's face. "Reeves goes through the right channels. Everyone goes through the right channels. The organization's legitimate operations survive because the evidence is specific enough to separate them from the criminal architecture. And you," she paused, "you walk away from the parts that were always going to get you killed anyway." The room was very quiet. Damian looked at Reeves, then back at her. "You've been planning this longer than tonight," he said. "I've been thinking about it since I left your house," she said. "I didn't know how it would end. I just knew what ending I could live with." Damian was still for a long moment. The man who had made his decisions by dominance and fear and the careful deployment of power for 20 years, standing in a small office on the 4th floor of a midtown building with the architecture of his entire life arrayed around him and a woman telling him to choose something he had never chosen before. He looked at Reeves one more time. "Stand up," he said. Reeves stood, and Damian did something Marcus Reeves had never seen him do in 11 years. He stepped aside and let someone else make the call. He looked at Amara and said, "Make the call." She already had her phone out. She was already dialing the number she had kept at the back of the notepad, the one she had written there 6 weeks ago when she first understood where her 14 months of evidence was leading and knew she was going to need a way to deliver it that was larger than herself, because some things are too important to depend on any single person surviving the night. The line rang twice. A voice answered. "This is Special Agent Torres." "This is Amara Bellamy," she said. "I have what you've been looking for. I have a witness, I have physical evidence, and I have the man who built the network standing in the same room with me." She looked at Reeves. "I need you at 612 Madison Avenue, 4th floor, in the next 30 minutes. And I need you to bring whatever you need to make this official, because we're only doing this once, and I need it to hold." A pause on the other end, then, "I'll be there in 25. She lowered the phone. The room held its shape around her. Damian to her left, Reeves in the guest chair, the two quiet men at the door, the drive on the desk with 14 months of truth on it, the city outside the window going about its indifferent business. And somewhere in all of that, in the specific silence of the next 25 minutes, something that had been wrong for a very long time was about to start being corrected. But first, Reeves looked up at her from the guest chair with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not defeat exactly, more like a man encountering something he had genuinely not anticipated, which for a person of his particular arrogance was perhaps the most disorienting experience available. "One question," he said. She waited. The second back up. His eyes were steady, measuring. "Where is it?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not warmly. The specific smile of a woman who has been underestimated by a very intelligent man and has spent 14 months making sure he stayed underestimated until she was ready. "That," she said, "is the one thing I'm keeping to myself." 23 minutes. The elevator at the end of the hall began to hum. Someone was coming up. Damian moved to the door and looked through the glass wall toward the elevator bank, and something in the angle of his shoulders changed. Not relaxation, something more complicated than that. Like a man standing at the border of two different versions of his life, feeling the weight of both simultaneously, unable to determine which one is heavier until he actually steps across. The elevator reached 4. The doors opened. And it was not Special Agent Torres who stepped out. It was Vivian Cross. And she was holding something that made the two quiet men at the door reach for weapons they were not going to get to in time. Something small and black that caught the light from the corridor in a way that made every decision made in the last 25 minutes suddenly, irreversibly, not enough. The thing Vivian was holding was a phone. It took approximately 2 seconds for that fact to register across the room. 2 seconds during which two trained men had their hands moving toward weapons they did not need, during which Damian's body had shifted into a geometry of controlled violence that he did not quite complete, during which Amara's mind had already begun constructing and discarding 3 different versions of what happened next. Then the 2 seconds were over and everyone in the room recalibrated simultaneously, with the specific collective embarrassment of people who have just revealed exactly how close to the edge they have been operating all evening. Vivian stood in the elevator doorway with the phone in her hand and looked at the room, at the two men frozen mid-reach, at Damian's posture, at Reeves in the guest chair, at Amara behind the desk. And something in her face moved through several emotions in quick succession before settling on something that was not quite composure, but was at least its functional equivalent. "I'm not here for trouble," she said. Her voice was steadier than Amara expected. "I'm here because I have something you need to hear." Nobody moved for a moment. Amara said, "Let her in." Damian looked at her. "Let her in," Amara said again, same tone. He stepped aside. Vivian came into the office slowly, with the careful deliberateness of someone who understands they are moving through a room where the tolerance for surprises has been entirely exhausted. She was dressed simply, dark coat, no jewelry, none of the elaborate glamour that had defined her in every context where Amara had previously encountered her. She looked smaller without it. Not weak, just human. The specific humanness of a person who has removed their armor because they've decided the armor is no longer serving the purpose they built it for. She stopped in the center of the room and looked at Reeves. Something passed between them. Not warmth, something harder than warmth. The specific look of two people who have been connected through a shared situation that neither of them would have chosen if they had understood where it was going from the beginning. "He told you about Vivian," she said to Amara. Not a question. "That he brought me in, that I was useful." "He told me," Amara said. What he didn't tell you. She glanced at Reeves. He was watching her with an expression that had gone very still, the stillness of a man who has just identified a variable he failed to account for. Is that he didn't bring me in. I came to him. She looked back at Amara. I came to him 6 years ago with information about Damian's organization that I had gathered independently. I was a journalist, investigative. I had been working a story about financial structures in the outer boroughs for 2 years, and Damian's operation was a thread I kept pulling. She paused. Reeves found me before the story published. He made me an offer. To bury the story, Damian said, low. To redirect it, she said. He told me the story I had was surface, that if I embedded myself, if I got closer, if I stayed patient, I would eventually have something that was actually worth telling. She looked at her hands for a moment. I believed him. I spent 4 years believing him. I stopped being a journalist and started being an asset, and I told myself it was still the same thing because eventually there would be a story worth telling. The room was quiet. And then, she said, I met Damian, and I understood something that Reeves had not anticipated when he recruited me. She looked at Damian directly, not with the performance Amara had always read in her before, but with something stripped back and uncomfortable and genuine. You were not what the story said you were. The operation was not what I thought it was, and I was in a position where I could not get out without giving Reeves what he needed or burning myself completely. So you stayed, Amara said. I stayed, and I watched you. She looked at Amara steadily. I watched you the whole time, what you did for him, what you built beside him, and I understood that what I was doing was wrong, not the gathering of information, wrong, to you, specifically. She held her gaze. I'm not asking for anything. I'm not asking for your forgiveness or your understanding. I'm telling you what is true because you deserve to have the complete picture and because I am finished letting Marcus Reeves be the person who controls what the truth looks like. She held up the phone. 6 years of recorded conversations, she said. Reeves and me. Everything he told me to do, everything he asked me to find out, every instruction he gave, and every piece of information I delivered. All of it time-stamped and stored on a cloud account he doesn't know about. She set the phone on the desk in front of Amara. The login is on a note card in my coat pocket. I'll give it to whoever needs it. The room was absolutely still. Reeves looked at Vivian with an expression that Amara would remember for a long time. Not rage, not betrayal in any theatrical sense, but the expression of a man who has spent years believing he understood the people around him completely and has just discovered a gap in that understanding large enough to drive everything through. Vivian, he said, very quiet. No, she said. She did not look at him. Amara looked at the phone on the desk. Then she looked up at Vivian Cross, this woman she had cataloged as the reason her marriage ended, the instrument of the worst night of her life, the person wearing her husband's robe in her own kitchen. And she did the thing that took more effort than any other decision she made that evening. She let go of the story she had been telling about Vivian. Not completely, not immediately, but enough. Enough to see what was actually in the room rather than what she had decided was there 14 months ago and had not updated since. The note card, Amara said. Vivian reached into her pocket and set it on the desk. Amara picked it up and read the credentials and then looked at one of the quiet men. Verify it, she said. He took the card and moved to the corner with his own phone. 30 seconds. Then he looked up and nodded once. Amara added the phone and the note card to the drive on the desk. The pile of evidence was now considerably larger than it had been 20 minutes ago. Large enough that what had been a strong case was now something close to airtight. She looked at all of it and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction, which was too clean for what this was, but something like the specific relief of a very long calculation finally reaching its correct answer. She looked at the time on her phone. Special Agent Torres had 7 minutes. She looked at Damian. He had been standing at the edge of the room through Vivian's entire account with his arms at his sides and his face doing the controlled nothing that she knew now, after everything, was not the absence of feeling, but its extreme presence. He was watching her. He had been watching her since Vivian finished speaking and Amara made the decision about the note card, watching with the particular attention of a man who has seen something he has been trying to understand for a long time and is finally, in this room, beginning to. "You knew she was coming," he said. "I didn't know," Amara said. "I hoped." She held his gaze. "I reached out to her 3 days ago. I told her what I had found, and I told her that the situation was moving toward an ending and that if she had anything she wanted to add to the correct side of it, the window was closing." She paused. "She didn't confirm she was coming. I didn't know until she walked out of that elevator." "You kept it from me." "Yes." "Because you didn't trust what I'd do if I knew." She was quiet for a moment. Honest quiet, not evasive. "Because I needed her to choose it herself. If you knew, it would have changed the variables. You would have wanted to control the approach, manage the contact, apply pressure in your own way." She looked at him steadily. "And then it wouldn't have been her choice. It would have been yours. And her testimony needed to be hers." He looked at her for a long time. "How many things did you know that you didn't tell me?" he asked. Not with anger, with genuine curiosity. The question of a man discovering that the person he thought he knew completely had been, the entire time, considerably more than he accounted for. "Enough," she said. "The right ones." The elevator opened again. Special Agent Torres was a woman in her early 50s with short gray hair and a gray coat that matched it, and the specific unhurried intensity of someone who has been building toward a single moment for 6 years and is not going to rush it now that it has arrived. She came through the glass door and looked at the room, at the people, at the desk, at the organized pile of evidence, and said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at Amara. "Bellamy. Torres." Amara gestured to the desk. "There's more here than I told you about on the phone." Torres moved to the desk and looked at the drive, then the phone, then the note card. She picked up the note card and read it. She looked up at Vivian. "You're the source." 6 years, Vivian said. "All of it." Torres set the note card down carefully, the way you set down something that is going to require a great deal of careful handling from this point forward. She looked at Reeves in the guest chair. "Marcus Reeves." He looked back at her without expression. "I'm going to need everyone's cooperation for the next several hours," Torres said. She was already on her radio, her voice dropping into the particular register of a professional in motion. She looked at Damian. "Mr. Voss." "I know," Damian said. "There will be a significant conversation about the organization's structure, about what separates the legitimate operations from—" "I know," he said again. "I'll cooperate." Torres looked at him for a moment, then at Amara. "You're doing?" "His choice," Amara said. Torres almost smiled. Almost. "All right." She looked at the room. "Let's begin." What followed was not dramatic. That was the thing about endings that the long middle of difficult situations never quite prepares you for. The actual end is administrative. It is people in coats asking careful questions and writing things down, and other people arriving and the specific bureaucratic machinery of consequence beginning to turn. It is long and it is unglamorous, and it has the quality of an exhale after a very long time of held breath. Not pleasant exactly, but necessary, and in its necessity carrying a kind of relief that has nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with truth, finding the shape it was always supposed to have. Reeves was removed at 10:47 p.m. He did not make a scene. He stood when they asked him to stand, and he walked when they directed him to walk. And at the doorway he stopped for one moment and looked back at the room. Not at Torres, not at the evidence. At Damian. Damian looked back at him. Whatever passed between them in that moment was 11 years of something that no one else in the room had the full context to read, and neither of them spoke it aloud. Then Reeves turned and walked out, and the door closed behind him, and the chapter that had been running for 11 years under everything else, silent and destructive as a fault line, finally closed. Vivian gave her statement to one of Torres's people in the conference room down the hall. She was there for 2 hours. When she came out, she looked wrung out and specific, the way people look when they have said a difficult thing completely and are now carrying the strange lightness of a weight removed rather than the satisfaction of a problem solved. She stopped in the doorway of Amara's office, where Amara was still sitting, still working through the final documentation with Torres's team. "I'm sorry," Vivian said. She said it simply. No performance, no elaboration, just the two words in their plain form. Amara looked at her for a moment. I know, she said. Go get some sleep. Vivian left. It was past 1 in the morning when the last of Torres's people collected the final materials and the office was quiet again. Torres stood by the desk, pulling on her coat, and looked at Amara across the space where several hours of very consequential things had just happened. The organization's legitimate operations, Torres said. The businesses, the employment records, the development projects. I meant what I said about separating them. The evidence is specific enough. It doesn't have to take everything down. I know, Amara said. That was deliberate. The way you structured the evidence. You built a wall between the clean parts and the rest of it. The people who work in those businesses didn't do anything wrong, Amara said. They needed their jobs to survive the investigation. Torres looked at her steadily. You structured 14 months of evidence with the legal outcome pre-engineered. I structured it to be accurate, Amara said. What's accurate happens to be precise. Torres buttoned her coat. You would have made a very good federal agent. I made a very good wife, Amara said. For longer than I should have. I'm figuring out what I make now. Torres left. The office was empty. Damian was still there. He had stayed through all of it, had answered the questions asked of him directly and without deflection, had sat with Torres for 40 minutes going through the structural architecture of his organization with the specificity of a man who had decided, somewhere in the course of this long evening, that the version of himself that was done hiding things was the version he was going to be from here forward. He sat now in the guest chair, Reeves's chair, the chair on the correct side of the desk, and looked at the empty surface in front of him where the evidence had been. Amara was in her own chair. The lamp was still on. The city outside the window had gone to its late-night register, quieter, the specific sound of a place that has been running at full intensity for 18 hours and is finally allowing itself to slow. They had not been alone in the same room since the conversation at 4 o'clock that afternoon, which felt like it had happened in a different year. The second backup, Damian said. The real one. Celeste has it, Amar said. She's had it since the day I made the copy. I mailed it to her hotel before I knew she was taken. It arrived this morning. She looked at him. She doesn't know what's on it. She just knew to hold it until I asked for it, or until she called the number I gave her. He absorbed that. You used your best friend as a dead drop. I asked her to hold a package. She said yes without asking what was in it. Amara looked at her hands on the desk. She's been doing that for 23 years. Damian was quiet for a moment. Then, I want to say something. I know. Let me say it anyway. She looked at him. He leaned forward with his forearms on his knees. The same open posture Reeves had used hours ago, but on Damian, it looked different. It looked like it cost something, and looked at her with the particular directness of a man who has run out of the energy required to be anything other than exactly what he is. I spent a long time believing that what I built was what I was, he said. The organization, the reputation, the position. I thought the man who made all of that was the real version, and everything else was just the quiet time between. The marriage, the house, the life we had. I thought that was the rest. He paused. I had it backward the whole time. I had it so completely backward that I didn't understand I had it backward until I watched you walk out of my house, and I was standing in my own hallway, realizing that the only thing in it that had been real just left. Amara said nothing. She let him have the silence. I'm not asking you to come back, he said. I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know that I understand what I did. Not the one night. The whole accumulation of it. The years of taking your loyalty as infrastructure instead of as a gift. Of using your steadiness as a guarantee instead of as something I needed to earn every day. His voice had dropped. Not from emotion suppressed, but from emotion that had found its true level after a long time of performing at the wrong volume. I used you up like a resource, and then I was surprised when you were gone. The lamp made a small sound. The city outside shifted in its quiet register. I know, Amara said. Her voice was not cold. It was not warm in the way that forgiveness feels warm. It was something more careful than either, the voice of a woman who has looked at a true thing directly and is now simply confirming that she has seen it. Is there anything, he said, that I can do? Not to fix it. I know it doesn't fix. Is there anything I can do that would mean something? She thought about that question seriously. She had been thinking about a version of it for several months, in the quiet of her sublet apartment in the early mornings before the day started, when it is easiest to look at difficult things without flinching because the day hasn't arrived yet with all its demands. She had not expected to be answering it in her office at 1:30 in the morning after the longest night of her life, but she had learned in the last several hours that preparation and arrival rarely look the same. The people in the legitimate businesses, she said, the employees, when the restructuring happens, and it will be significant, I want your word that they are protected, that the transition is clean, that the people who just worked and did nothing wrong don't lose everything because of a structure they didn't build. Done, he said immediately. I'm not finished. She held up one hand. The contractor, the woman who accessed my office, she was recruited by Reeves, and I believe she was coerced into most of what she did. I've already indicated to Torres that the evidence against her is circumstantial. I want her treated accordingly. All right. And Vivian, she watched his face. Whatever your feelings about what she did, she came tonight. She didn't have to come. She came because I asked her and because she chose to. That matters. I want your word that she doesn't face anything unofficial after the legal process runs its course. Something moved across his face that was complicated and not entirely comfortable. All right, he said. She nodded. Those are the things that would mean something. He looked at her. Nothing for yourself. I'm taking care of myself. I know. He said it quietly. That's the part that... He stopped, started again. Watching you tonight. What you built in the months since you left. What you already had in place before any of this started. The networks, the evidence, the contingencies. He shook his head slightly. You were capable of all of this the whole time we were together. You were operating at a fraction of it because you were pointed at supporting something that should have been pointed at supporting you. I chose that, she said. I'm not a victim of it. I chose to build my life around yours, and I'd make different choices now. And that's the difference between where I was and where I am. She looked at him steadily. The point isn't blame. The point is that I know now what I'm capable of when I'm pointed in my own direction, and I'm not going to forget that. He held her gaze. In his eyes, past the exhaustion and the weight of the night, and the years of things both said and unsaid, there was something that had no clean name, loss and respect, and the specific grief of a person who finally understands the value of what they held at the exact moment they understand it is no longer theirs to hold. I know, he said. I know you're not. They sat in the quiet office for a few minutes more, not with the uncomfortable silence of unresolved things, but with the different kind of silence that comes when everything that needs to be said has been said, and what remains is simply two people in a room together at the end of something, breathing. Then Amara stood up. She turned off the desk lamp. The room went dim, lit only by the ambient light coming through the window from the city outside. The specific gray gold of a New York night that is never fully dark because the city does not permit full darkness, which is both its flaw and its particular kind of beauty. Go home, she said. Sleep. Tomorrow there will be a great deal to deal with and you need to be clear for it. He stood. He picked up his coat. He moved toward the door and then stopped, the way he had stopped in the doorway of their bedroom the night she left, but this time without the weight of expectation in it. This time, just a man pausing. The waterfront thing you mentioned once, he said. Small ceremony, no cameras, just... He stopped himself. Never mind, too soon. I know. She looked at him. Not too soon, she said. Too much still to do. She held his gaze. Ask me again when the doing is done. He looked at her for a long moment. Then something in his face settled into a different shape. Not the controlled authority, not the exhausted grief of the long night, but something quieter than either. A man standing at the beginning of a very long road that he was not certain he deserved and was going to walk anyway. Good night, Amara, he said. Good night, Damian. He left. She stood alone in the dim office for a moment, in the city's ambient light, in the specific silence of a place where an enormous amount had just happened and the air still held the shape of it. She looked at her desk. Clean now, the evidence gone, the lamp off, just the surface of a desk that belonged to a company she had built in 11 weeks from nothing. She picked up her coat and her bag. She checked her phone. A text from Celeste sent 32 minutes ago. I'm watching terrible TV and eating room service, and I need you to tell me you're okay. She typed back, I'm okay. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Sleep. 3 seconds. Then, you better explain everything. Also, the chocolate mousse here is extraordinary. Coming here every time something terrible happens. Amara looked at the message for a moment. Then she did something she had not done in a very long time. Something she had not had occasion for or had not allowed herself through months of careful composure and deliberate strength and the necessary discipline of a woman rebuilding from the foundation up. She laughed. Briefly, genuinely, the kind of laughter that arrives not because something is funny, but because the alternative is crying and the body chooses laughter at the last possible moment, which is perhaps its most reliable form of grace. She turned off the office light. She took the elevator down. The street was quiet and cold and absolutely itself. The indifferent, ordinary city, still going, still moving, still containing everything at once. She stepped outside and stood for a moment on the sidewalk and felt the cold air against her face and let it be cold, did not brace against it or organize herself around it. Just let it arrive. 6 months later, Amara Bellamy sat in the office she had moved to, larger, better light, a view that actually earned looking at, and finished the last page of a quarterly report for a client whose business had grown 30% in 4 months under her advisory. She set the report down and looked out the window at the late afternoon city. Damian's organization had been restructured over 3 months of careful legal work. The criminal architecture was gone. The legitimate businesses remained, cleaned, transparent, operating under a compliance framework that Torres's office had approved, and Amara had quietly helped design because she understood the architecture better than anyone, and because she had decided that if she was going to be involved in the ending of something, she was going to be involved in what came after it too. Damian had kept every promise he made in her office that night. She had verified each one. Reeves was in federal custody, awaiting trial. The charges were extensive. The 6 years of recordings Vivian provided were the spine of the prosecution case, and the trial was expected to take months. Vivian herself had entered into a cooperation agreement and had, in the weeks following that night, begun writing again. Not investigative journalism exactly, but something adjacent to it, something Amara had heard about through mutual channels and thought sounded in the specific and complicated way of things that begin in damage and find their way towards something else. Exactly right. Celeste had moved her Friday client meetings to Thursday so that she and Amara could have lunch every Friday, a reclaimed ritual from their 20s that had been interrupted by years of busy and complicated life, and had now been returned to with the extra care that people give to things they understand they almost lost. Amara had not gone back to Damian's house. She had not needed to. The conversations between them had been careful and honest and had happened on neutral ground. Sometimes at her office, once at a quiet restaurant where neither of them knew anyone, once on a long walk through Central Park on an overcast Sunday when they talked for 2 hours about everything except the obvious thing, and both understood that the everything else was how you got to the obvious thing. Eventually, if the obvious thing was where you were going. She was not sure yet if that was where she was going. She was sure that she was not in a hurry to be sure. The city was turning orange outside her window, the low winter sun doing what it did in late afternoon, laying light across the buildings at an angle that made everything look, for 20 minutes, like it was made of something more valuable than concrete and glass. She watched it the way you watch something beautiful when you have recently been through something that reminded you not to let the beautiful things pass without watching them. Her phone buzzed. A text. She looked at the screen. Damian. There's a waterfront thing. This weekend. Small. No cameras. Just a pause, visible in the delay of the next message arriving. I'm not asking yet. I just wanted you to know it's there if you ever decide you want to see it. She read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the desk and looked back out the window at the orange city, at the light doing what light does when it's running out of day and making the most of what remains. And she felt something arrive in her chest that was not the careful, composed steadiness she had been carrying for months, but something warmer and more uncertain than that, Something she was not going to name yet because things that are new and real and fragile do not benefit from being named too quickly. She would answer him tonight or tomorrow. There was no urgency. She had learned in the long way that the things worth having do not require you to hurry toward them, only to move honestly in their direction, with your eyes open and your hands free, and the full knowledge of what you are choosing and why. She picked up the quarterly report and finished her notes. Outside, the orange light lasted exactly as long as it always does. Then it changed into something else, the way things do when they're done being what they were. And the city settled into its evening self, and Amara Bellamy sat in her own office, in her own company, in her own life, and breathed, simply and completely, in the quiet that follows the end of a very long storm. Not healed, not finished, not certain of what came next, but here, still standing, still hers, and that, after everything, was enough.